On to our Williamsport City Council meeting. It's Thursday, April 27th. We're at Trade and Transit 2, third floor. Please rise for the invocation by Councilman Bider, followed by the flag salute and the roll call.
Dear Lord, I pray that you guide us as always. Help us satisfy the needs of our community during this meeting. Strengthen us as we make tough decisions. Please guide us so that this meeting can be productive. Let us be effective and decisive. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Frank, would you call the roll?
Mr. Allison,
Here.
Mr. Mackey,
Here.
Mr. Pelisi,
Here.
Mr. Bider,
Here.
Ms. Mealy. Here. Mrs. Katz. Here. Mr. Yoder.
Here, we have a full house tonight. All right. Item 3, approval of city council meeting minutes from April 13th, 2023. Is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second. Motion and a second. Any comments or questions on the meeting minutes? Hearing and seeing none, Mrs. Frank on the motion.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes.
Mr. Yoder.
Yes. Motion passes 7-0. Item 4, limited courtesy of the floor. Excuse me. We've had no requests. We're going to jump around just a bit here this evening. We're going to jump down to item 11, Mrs. Frank.
Resolution authorizing purchase of a server refresh from Global Data Consultants LLC.
Hang on. I'm on the wrong agenda.
Oh, the 11th, okay. Resolution to approve FY 2023 annual action plan for CDBG and home investment partnerships.
Is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second. Motion and a second. Just to confirm, Janice, that's number 11 on yours also. Okay.
It is, I'm
Gotcha.
sorry.
No worries. I thought it was me.
No, it's me.
Skip, welcome. Good evening. The floor is yours.
Good evening, President Yoder and members of council. The first item we bring to you tonight, because they're all going to be interrelated as we go through this, is the approval of the fiscal year 2023 annual action plan for community development, block grant, and home investment partnership funds. I'll try to be as brief as possible. The CDBG funds for 2023, the total amount is $1,023,714. $397,614 will be for street reconstruction, $83,300 for removal of architectural barriers, curb cuts, $156,300 for the Brandon Park bench hill restoration, excuse me, $90,700 for city office removal of architectural barriers, $156,300 for the Memorial Park exercise facility, and $141,500 for administration. The home funds, a total of $307,845, $172,061 for owner occupied single family rehabilitation, $105,000 for home buyer assistance, and $30,784 for administration. With me this evening is Jamie Schroeder and Michael Berger from CEDACOG, and Jamie will be here to explain in further detail the process that we went through for this round of funds.
Skip. Good evening. So as you know, we have to approve the 2023 annual action plan to be submitted to HUD this evening for your home and your CDBG funding. We went through the citizen participation process, had the 2 required hearings, received about 11 project suggestions, put them all together, came up with these recommendations, working with your city office and the mayor. And this evening, we need you to approve the resolution to apply for these funds and the certification signed, the mayor will sign off on those projects were selected by council. I'm glad to take any questions if you have any.
This was reviewed in the Economic Revitalization Committee. Mr. Biter.
This was reviewed in ERC. This, in conjunction with the next two items on the agenda, were also reviewed. This is a little bit more pertinent to what we have as far as budget is concerned. Obviously, with street reconstruction there and the Brennan Park fan shell restoration, a project that I'm excited to see happen finally. Mr. Sanders did inform me that bids are going to start to happen next week, I believe, on that project. So some action will be going on over there as well. But that all being said, this is pretty standard stuff that happens every year for us to make sure that we are able to take advantage of these CDBG funds. We have to obviously outline it in this particular way, so we abide by federal standing. And that is what CDCOG is helping us with. And we voted on a contract for CDCOG, I believe it was in November of last year. So that is, the contract is what is providing us with this service, and that is how it is being paid for.
Thank you, Mr. Biter. Are there any comments or questions on this from members of council? Ms. Mealy.
Just two questions, actually, probably from Mr. Menny. I know that we are the city's Chodo at this point, the only Chodo in the city right now is Habitat for Humanity, correct?
Correct.
And is that full owner occupied single family rehabilitation amount going to the Chodo? That's not, right? How much are we putting into Habitat?
I believe there's about $30,000 for the Chodo.
Okay. And so how many years did we promise that to Habitat for the project on Memorial?
South Street property, 5 years.
5 years. Okay, so they are our designated Chodo for receipt of home funds through that point. Got it. And then the other thing is, and this I think is just me not having followed this, but what is the Memorial Park exercise facility?
That was a project that John Sanders showed to, I believe it was the Public Works Committee. It's an exercise facility potentially to be built in Memorial Park for outside exercise. It's a project that is being sponsored by an organization statewide, countrywide. I can't remember the name, but it is outdoor yoga, those kinds of activities. And the organization would put up, I believe, $30,000 to $40,000 of cost for this facility, and the balance is what we're providing with CDBG funds.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Menny.
Any other comments or questions? Mr. Mackey.
Skip, I'm just curious, what barriers are we removing? City offices
City
removal?
offices, there are 3 entrances to the city offices that do not have the push button access for the door releases. It is the 3rd floor of Trade and Transit 1. It is the 2nd floor of Trade and Transit 1. It's the tax collector's office. Those are the 3 facilities that we would be providing push button access for people with disabilities to be able to access the building.
Ms. Mealy.
Johnny, is that everything you need? I guess my next question is, I know in years past that we sort of allocate funding for a given project, and then we are able for a few years after that allocation has happened to reassess the allocation in the event. But I know that things seem to have changed in terms of our relationship with HUD recently. So I guess what I'm saying is the exercise facility and or the architectural barriers funding, if the partner funding wouldn't come through for the exercise facility, if we would decide that we weren't going to remain in the Trade and Transit 1 building, can we reallocate those funds, or is this now a more certain decision?
But it could be done.
Okay. Because yes, we certainly have reallocated a lot of CDBG funding in the past, but I wasn't sure to what extent that was still a
It was a
possibility.
little bit simpler a few years ago, but now
Okay.
it has to be a substantial amount.
Got it. And that would be once again the responsibility of CEDACOG or something like
With
that. would
twenty
happen.
twenty-three going forward, yes.
Got it. Have we done that in the last year or two, or have we basically spent the
We have
funding
done
as we?
some substantial amendments.
Okay,
That is going to come to council and you have approved.
got it. How long do we have to spend this 2023 funding at this point?
7 years.
Okay, so we do still have a pretty long amount of time, but
Yes.
but we'll need to close out the 2023 budget year in 5 years, correct?
Yeah, you should have your things done in 5 years. HUD isn't, they give you 7 to get everything done.
Got it.
Your
But we
contract
should,
is
but we
like
should
that.
have all of the years closed, like the whole year
Yes.
closed out and the funds expended within 5 years.
You
Got
should,
it.
yes.
Okay. I know the rules are changing a little bit and I'm not quite sure how they're shifting, so.
They
thank
like you to get everything done in the 5, so you have the last couple to close everything out.
Got it.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
I do, Adam.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes, I just want to clarify, when John Sanders brought the Memorial Park exercise facility to us, it was renderings. And one of the things, Skip, that he did say is that he was also going to try to go after naming rights for it also to cover some of the, to cover the expense of this. Has that been brought up in your meetings?
We did discuss that, and if that eventuality does happen, we could reduce the contribution of the city funds to CDBG and reallocate them, as we just discussed, through a substantial amendment to another project.
And I think everybody should be cognizant of the fact that the reason why this is going, he wants this in Memorial Park is because this facility, this company likes to have their facilities done where there's traffic, a lot of traffic going through. And that was one of the reasons why Memorial Park was picked. So, we had no alternative for this. Because when we discussed this, I thought some other parks would be good, but it was their choice of where we were going. But I'm hoping that we can have naming rights to save us some money on this.
Thank you, Mrs. Katz. Any other comments or questions? Okay. Hearing and seeing none, Mrs. Frank on the motion, please.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes,
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. Item 12.
Resolution to approve plan and policies readoption program.
Is there a motion and a second?
So moved. Second.
Motion and a second. The floor is yours again, Skip.
Thank you, President Yoder. I'm sorry, I was giving you a promotion. I apologize. But President Yoder and members of council, this resolution is to update the policies and procedures for the CDBG and home program as recommended by CEDACOG, so that we are in compliance with the HUD guidelines. There are about 13 different policies and procedures, and the documentation was provided along with the resolution. I'm not going to go through them all. If there are specific questions, I will be glad to answer them, Jamie or myself.
Thank you, Skip. This was reviewed also in ERC. Mr. Bider, anything to add?
No, what I had said in the meeting and what I will reiterate, without federal regulations, where would we be? So CEDACOG, we thank you for that. And again, this is being paid for through the contract that we approved last year.
Thank you, Mr. Bider. Any comments or questions? Ms. Mealy?
I'm not entirely clear which of these items apply to which of the items on the agenda, but we're designating a language access coordinator.
So as part of your CDBG and home program, you're required to have certain documentation in a file for when you're monitored. Yes, so the city has to have a language access plan. It's a model document. And then somebody on that plan would be designated as the coordinator. Off the top of my head, I don't recall who that might be.
I guess that's why I was asking. There's no name in the documentation we have.
Yeah, there may not be a person designated. Let me find that one. It's in this whole pile here. I'm almost there. Here we are. Okay. The MBWB policy is too long. Okay, language access coordinator. So, well, there is no name on my copy. I don't know if there's a name when I have a draft. I don't know if.
There was no name specifically picked out if and when the need arises, we would have to retain a language interpreter for whatever language is going to be necessary.
So this is not the person within city government who makes certain that we retain the language coordinator. This is the language, the person who speaks the language that it's necessary.
This is basically saying that if necessary, you are able to provide translations and access to the documentation should somebody request it.
Got it. I guess what I was asking is because it is sufficient for their needs, even if there's no one designated in that,
Correct.
because we're passing it. Okay.
Yes.
All
Yes.
right, got it. And we only have 151 people in the city of Williamsport who are not considered English proficient.
That's what the data says. That's probably not correct. But if you've ever looked at census or American Community Survey
True.
data,
Yeah.
that's about as
yeah,
close
low
as it
response.
gets.
Got it. Okay.
Unfortunately.
All right. Excellent. That's all.
Any other comments or questions from other members of council? Okay, hearing and seeing none, Mrs. Frank on the motion.
Mr. Allison.
Yes.
Mr. Mackey.
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi.
Yes.
Mr. Bider.
Yes.
Ms. Mealy.
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes,
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. And then item 13, Mrs. Frank.
Resolution appointing a section 504 compliance officer and establishing a grievance procedure.
Is there a motion and a second?
So moved. Second.
Motion and a second. Ms. Skip,
Again,
you're up again.
thank you, President Yoder, members of council. Section 504 compliance has to do with accessibility and whether there's a city facility that someone comes up and has an issue with access. We chose John Sander because he had been dealing with SIL most recently. I do know that there is a process in place that Gary Narr is taking the certification for those activities. And once he's certified, we'll change the name. But at present time, we were going to use John because he's been so involved with dealing with the issues as presented by SIL. If you have any questions, we'll be glad to answer. It's perfunctory. It's another document to sign and put in the file.
Yep. Thank you, Skip. And Mr. Bider, reviewing the ERC, anything to add?
Nothing to add.
Thank you, Mr. Bider. Any comments or questions from other members of council? Okay, hearing and seeing none, Mrs. Frank on the motion.
Mr. Allison.
Yes.
Mr. Mackey.
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi.
Yes.
Mr. Bider.
Yes.
Ms. Mealy.
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
yes,
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. Skip, thank you very much, both of you from CEDACOG. Thank you for being here as well. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We should have Jack Ragan on Zoom. Is he on? From UHY?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. We will jump to.
And he appears.
And we'll jump to item 7, Mrs. Frank.
Resolution authorizing creation of a small business and nonprofit grant program.
Is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. The mayor is not here, so I'll take a quick stab at this. So this is a resolution creating a small business nonprofit grant program. I think it was about the end of last year. A handful of us were just chit chatting about a number of things related to the budget, and this idea came up. I specifically remember Councilwoman Mealy and Councilman Pelisi having really heavy interest in this. The idea was to create a business loan program and ideally make it some kind of a sustainable loan program. The administration thankfully kind of took the lead and ironed out the details, and that's what's in front of us here tonight. It is in the form of a grant program, however, and so I know this was discussed in finance, I believe, and so I'll turn the floor over to Ms. Mealy and the members of the finance committee to kind of dive into this a little bit more.
We had somewhat of a discussion about this item, a fairly lengthy discussion. We actually did not address the difference between the loan concept and the grant concept. But the sum total pool at this point allocated for this program is about $1 million. And I think perhaps from my way of thinking with the pool that's is large, but also somewhat small compared to the need, perhaps that sticking with just the grant program was acceptable. But I'm more than willing to hear other people's thoughts on that. We discussed a handful of things, and Mr. Regan was instrumental, of course, in explaining the entire thing. In fact,
He's here. He's
well, I was
he's
going
on
to say,
Zoom.
Jack, do you actually want to explain this a little further before we dive in?
Sure, I mean, and I can circle back for just a second. You know, you were talking about the grant versus loan. And, you know, one thing I do want to point out is if you did structure it as a loan program and you extend the repayment date past December 31st, 2026, there are some other rules that come into effect where you would actually have to show up at the table with local dollars, i.e. non-ARPA dollars, in order to fund the loan program. Just a brief example, you know, let's say you wanted to make a $50,000 loan to a business that needed to repay it by, say, December 31st, 2027. You would have to discount that loan to present value. So let's say it's $45,000. Present value, $50,000 face value of the loan. You would have to pay $45,000 out of ARPA, and you'd have to pay $5,000 out of local funds. So you couldn't get the whole face value of $50,000 out of ARPA funds. Most of my governments, if they do a loan program, are structuring it such that the loan program and all the loan repayments are done by 12/31/26. So that you don't have to worry about that anymore. But I only have one out of about 22 that are doing any sort of loan program, and certainly think that the granting, you know, the grant program is an easier program to administer. At a high level, what we're trying to do with this grant program on the business side is it's structured as a $50,000 grant that will be made if the business also pays in $50,000. So it's a dollar for dollar matching grant, where, you know, it's got to be a Williamsport business. They've got to be in good standing with the state, and you know, it's for upgrading of fixed assets, construction of permanent walls, those sort of things that will substantially add value to the property. And again, that's restricted to $50,000, and they have to match it dollar for dollar. The nonprofit grant program is a little bit broader. There is no dollar for dollar matching concept on that one, and business or nonprofits that serve Williamsport residents. They may be Williamsburg-based nonprofits. They may be other nonprofits that come in and serve members of your community, are eligible for these grants. They would be on a reimbursement basis, and the cost of that they incur would be reimbursed on a quarterly basis. Both the businesses and the nonprofits would have to get what is called a unique entity identifier, or a UEI number, that is issued by the federal government. So all of this grant money can be tracked. You need it so that you can report it to Treasury. We envision a 60-day application window. Once this goes live, we will conduct several webinars. One that will be geared specifically towards the business community, one that will be geared towards the not-for-profit community. All of those will be recorded, available on the city website for playback. As folks may need some assistance in the application process, they will have our contact information so that we are able to help them in this process. And we would encourage the city to not adjudicate and approve any of the applications until after the entire grant period, or excuse me, application period has run. What we don't want to do, and what we saw under CARES Act, was that there was a race to the front of the line to make sure that they got their application in before the money ran out. And by keeping everything open for the full 60-day window and adjudicating after the window closes, every business, every nonprofit that submits an application will have an equal hearing and an equal opportunity to get the award. What we would do during that process is we would review the applications, make sure they're eligible, make sure that they are for an allowable cost, and then turn them over to the city for your review, ranking, and then ultimately award. We will not be doing any awarding. What we want to do is to turn to you a complete package that is ready to be adjudicated and hopefully approved. And if there's missing or incomplete information, or if there's additional information that the selection committee wants to obtain, we would help chase that down as well.
Thank you very much, Jack. That's super, super helpful. I'll turn it back over to you, Miss Mealy, for anything further to add from finance.
Yeah, so I think that then the majority of the finance discussion was sort of fleshing out an understanding of some of these items that Jack just discussed. We happen to have gotten an annotated copy of the guidelines, and I sided with Austin White's comment that the first paragraph under applicant eligibility in the business program was exceptionally unclear, and asked that the administration instead make that a bullet list. In other words, businesses with operations in Williamsport registered with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in good standing on taxes with the IRS, the city of Williamsport, anyway, and straight on down. We likewise wanted to create an opportunity for sole proprietors, although I'm not as certain that sole proprietors will have as much of a need and or ability to take advantage of this grant as other entities, as larger businesses might. But we liked the 60-person max for the business grant. I think Randy in particular had some questions about how we were going to determine that the nonprofit grant program was benefiting Williamsport citizens rather than a larger pool. Not, of course, that we don't like to see our nonprofits benefit a larger pool of individuals, but if the city's putting money into it, we want to see that it comes back to benefit the city. The two, aside from the bullet list for the eligibility requirements, the other items that we discussed, one was something that I think I in particular brought up. Randy and Eric, I wasn't quite clear on whether or not they agreed with me, but I thought that I should get the opinion of all members of council. When we had initially discussed this program, part of my idea was to use it as an incentive or as assistance for new businesses establishing themselves in the city. And that is not a part of the program that has currently been laid out by the administration and UHY. And according to Jack, it can be a part, but it would have to be set up as a separate program from the business grant program and the nonprofit grant program. We would have to have basically a third grant program for new businesses. To my way of thinking, although part of the point of this funding is to alleviate the impacts of the pandemic, one of the impacts of the pandemic has been to disincentivize business creation because of the challenge, the really unique financial challenges and staffing challenges that exist right now. And so I think that we would still be working on alleviating some of the impacts of the pandemic to the city by driving money toward a new small business program as well. But before we ask the administration to move in that direction, I wanted to get a sense of how many other folks might agree with that as a good idea. Keeping in mind that as of right now, as we discussed, the total pool of funding is $1 million. I had asked the mayor to have an idea for us tonight of how much funding, how much unallocated ARPA funding we had left so that we could possibly consider allocating more funding to a grant program. But the mayor is not able to be here this evening, so I don't have those numbers and I didn't see them come through via email.
Yeah, they did not come through. I think they're still working through that.
Yeah.
So,
Right. But so I guess those were the two kind of larger observations that I would make about this program, that I thought that we might need one further component, and that if we created that further component, we should perhaps try to find more global funding for the program. One of the things that we really liked about the way it was structured was that it's $1 million, but we could decide to allocate $700,000 to business grants and $300,000 to nonprofit, or vice versa. It's not 500,000 for each, which allows us to get the best bang for our buck, I think, in terms of finding the best proposals across the spectrum of all of the different programs. Anyway, I would assume that other members of the finance committee will also have things to say about this.
Mr. Allison, Mr. Biter, anything to add?
To the point that Liz was just making about the new businesses trying to spur that business. What my suggestion would be, instead of creating a whole nother program for this, would be to simply add language that would say, if we would be comfortable with it, we're giving preferential treatment to new businesses.
I thought that Jack said we couldn't do that, though.
Yeah, I think
Did
he
he?
said,
I
I think he
don't
said we
recall
have to
that.
have a separate program
Yeah.
for new versus existing. He's on, yeah.
Yeah, Jack,
I mean,
what-
it would be easier to administer in the grant process to have it as a separate
Okay.
category, but I think what we could, I mean, literally, I think what we could do to flag the routing on that is, someone's gonna have to check a box as to what year the business was founded. And if it's 2020 or earlier, it'd be in one bucket, and 2020 and later would be in a separate sort of this new business bucket. And I do have, the criteria ready to go should you want to see that criteria. It's pretty straightforward.
So you think that we could basically insert it into the existing business grant program language, right?
Yeah, actually you can, just
Good.
based on the information my staff gathered for me, it
Got
shouldn't be a problem.
Then I think as long as, is there a general consensus that is something that we would like to incentivize as well?
I don't see why we wouldn't.
Right.
Yeah,
that-
yeah,
I agree
that's
with
how it
that.
felt, Right. That I think, Jack, that we would like to see that added as well.
Okay.
One thing to mention, and I'm not sure that you went into a lot of detail about this, Jack, but there, one of the many functions that UHY will be providing to us, and in addition to putting together the guidelines, is that they will be more or less calling the applications, making certain that the applications are complete, and complete by deadline, or at least following up with people to give them the best opportunity to complete those applications by deadline. They will also be conducting several webinars / information sessions, so that people more fully understand the parameters of the program. Eric had an excellent suggestion during the finance committee meeting, that we should have, because as we know, Williamsport is perhaps a little bit behind the times in terms of technological adoption. All of these, the grant application, everything will be able to be filled out online, but that we should also have paper grant packets available, either at information sessions, physical information sessions, or the thought that I came up with was perhaps ask the Visitors Bureau and the foundation to host those paper grant packets so that people could go there to get further information. That way we are making it accessible to as many people in the city as possible. Right. Mhm.
All right. Any other comments or questions from other members? Mr. Mackey?
I apologize if this has already been discussed either at the finance committee meeting or at an earlier city council meeting. Let's hypothetically say we get 10 applications for grants. Who is actually deciding where the money's going? Is there a committee of some sort? Did they come before us for a vote? I mean, how does that work?
I don't believe any of them come before us for a vote, but those policies and procedures are still being determined
Okay.
by the administration and UHY. We do have obviously a number of other municipalities that have done this. So there are a number of kind of guidelines and or, failures and or successes that we can base them off of, but there is no selection committee as yet. And ideally we would get details on that shortly. I think we're looking at,
But there will be a selection committee. I would suspect at least a couple people from council will be a part of that, but it will not be approved by all 7 of us. Each application will not be approved by all 7 of us, so.
right, it's an administrative function.
Right,
Effectively,
okay.
right.
And we
We,
don't-
we, yeah, while we might have a voice, we will not have final say in anyway.
We don't have a timeline on when that will be formed.
Well, so the interesting thing about this program is that we're working on a relatively short deadline because of course we have to have all the funds allocated. And by the end of 2024.
Mhm.
So the idea would be to finalize these guidelines with a goal of opening the grant application process, I think by the beginning of June, correct, Mr. Regan?
Yep, that'll work.
A 60-day timeline for people to make application. That would mean that it would close by around the end of July.
Beginning of August,
And
somewhere there.
we would, I think, probably try to make decisions within about 30 days so that by the beginning of September, people would know whether or not they've received the funding. Even then, we would be asking them to expend the funds or put a very good effort in toward getting there by the end of March of 2024, which is a big
stretch.
ask for,
Yeah.
especially for a small business, or, but we, because we want to make sure that there aren't funds remaining, that people don't expend the grant funds they received. We sort of, I think, effectively need to claw back that funding, for lack of a better term, before the end of 2024, so that we can put it elsewhere.
Yeah.
Before it gets taken back by the feds. So while March 31st, as we discussed, might not be a hard deadline for getting the work of the grant completed, it is
It's close.
the initial hard deadline. Yeah, and that's the thing. We are running out of time to implement something like this. And I think, Jack, correct me if I'm wrong, the funding available to nonprofits, did we put a limit on that, or is that?
I think that's open-ended right now.
Yeah. So it's the max of $50,000 for businesses, but the nonprofit grant ask is open-ended. Might be wise to put a number on that.
Yeah, I
Just-
don't either.
Yeah, I know. I kind of thought it was too, but then I remembered that I hadn't seen it. We could potentially make it more than 50, but I certainly don't think that we want to be trying to judge an application for $300,000 against an application for 30. And,
Right.
and judging the impact and the effectiveness of the two.
I would totally agree with that. And I apologize, I'm asking you these questions. What kind of efforts being taken? Do we know what kind of efforts being taken to get the word out on this program? I mean, because obviously, as you said, Liz, we are running out of time, so.
That's
Right.
something that we haven't determined yet either, along with the committee. So we're going to rely on, obviously, the administration. We're going to rely on the treasurer's office to get information out. Hopefully we can set up
Okay,
some community meetings
yeah,
at various points throughout the city. I've used the example of the WEC Center over in Newberry is a great place.
Yep.
They're usually open for those kinds of things. But again, it's got to be advertised so that way the community knows about it.
And I know that part of the thing the one thing that I'd suggested at least was that Mr. Mackey, of course, maintains a list of all the registered businesses in the city because they all pay business privilege and mercantile taxes. So one of the easy ways to make certain that they were all aware of it would be to send them mail from the treasurer's office telling them that they could potentially get free money from the city, which would probably be better than what they were hoping.
sorry, and you're talking about Kevin. I thought you were talking about me. I did not have a.
John.
Oh, see, so-
I don't call him
Kevin,
Mr.
swear,
Mackey.
Kevin.
Kidding me? And then likewise, we could probably have the foundation reach out to the nonprofits, because while the foundation might not be in touch with every nonprofit in the community, they have their finger on the pulse more than almost anything else. So That clearly advertising, Facebook, social media, our website are excellent tools. But I think if the city did a one-time mailing from the treasurer's office to businesses and we asked the foundation to reach out in all manners to their nonprofits to notify them, I think that would be a very effective way of getting most people. And also perhaps a good way of incentivizing people in future to make sure that they are on a good footing with their business privilege and mercantile tax licenses.
Any other comments or questions?
I do, Adam.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes, Jack Reagan, is there a possibility, how would we go about having a point person? There should be a person that people can get in touch with to, explain this to, if they want more information, and who can follow through with some of the information also. You've done this with other cities and things. What did they do for that?
Usually it comes through us. So we've got a email box that is set up that will be on each, or will be on the grant application. So that as folks have a question, they can contact us and we can reach out to them. We also have the webinars, again, which will walk through the application process, including a demonstration of the portal that is recorded so that folks can play that back as well and see what's going on and how to do it. But yeah, they reach out to us and we need to do some hand holding. We do some hand holding.
I know during the meeting you did say that you would walk people through the grant application.
Yep.
Because sometimes it gets a little bit difficult when people don't understand some of the language.
Understood. Yep. And we keep the application process pretty straightforward. And I think the information, a business owner or someone who is administering a nonprofit organization can generally gather most, if not all, of the information with limited back and forth with us. But we're available to help anybody that needs to help.
Fantastic. I do have one other question for you. During the meeting, I thought you said with businesses, when they submit something with their suppliers, you said that if you found another supplier that was less expensive than who they were using, they would have to go through that supplier. Did I hear that right?
No, what they need to do is they need to obtain multiple quotes. Whether those are verbal quotes, whether they're written quotes, but they're going to need to obtain multiple quotes to make sure that they are getting the best stuff for the best price. That they do not need to go with the low bidder, but if they don't go with the low bidder, they need to justify why they went with someone other than the low quote that they got. And we go over all of that during the webinars.
That I did want to clarify, because some people have their suppliers that they've been using and are comfortable with and sometimes are better acclimated to the business. It may not be the cheapest.
Yep.
But it's better for the business. Okay.
But just because they've used them in the past and it wasn't competitive, part of getting these federal dollars is that they will follow these federal guidelines. So yeah, they may have to go back and justify why, to get those multiple quotes. And if they happen to go with someone that's not the low bidder, again, they have to document why they made that selection.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
That's all I have, Adam.
Jack, Norm, quick question for you. Do we need to amend the guidelines, like the things that we're talking about that we would like to see? Do we need to amend them to include them in this, or can the administration just incorporate them after the fact?
You're just really approving the idea.
Okay.
Because obviously the final guidelines have to be granted.
Okay. Jack, anything to add from a federal perspective on the funding?
I couldn't hear what the comments were. I'm sorry.
The question was, do we need to formally amend anything on guidelines to incorporate that, some of these additional ideas or changes that we're talking about, or can that happen after the fact and we just approve the resolution. I wasn't sure from a funding perspective if we needed to formally do that or not.
No, there's nothing from a federal perspective. If you're authorizing the program and given the broad parameters of the program to the administration, the administration needs to come up with the details for it, that there's nothing in the federal guidelines that says they have to come back to you with the complete.
Okay, thank you.
Complete application.
This is more probably of a question for other council members. So, personally, I'd prefer to see this just be for businesses. With all due respect to our nonprofit community, and I'm on 2 nonprofit boards, I think they have probably better access or more access to grant funding than what the business community does. And I think we're going to get good demand for this program from our business community. And when we talk about managing the tax burden, I think that we're going to get more out of that from or helping our business community. Again, with all due respect to our nonprofit community, I'm not saying that they don't provide an impact into the city. They absolutely do. But I think that they have a lot more grant funding resources they can leverage outside of the city. I mean, I'm not going to vote no against this thing by any means, but I think that would be good to look at. And I don't know what other members think of that idea of funneling it just to businesses and eliminating the nonprofits from this grant program.
I'd be more comfortable if we would put a cap on the nonprofit ask overall. And if we are going to have just one pot, if we were able to dissect that pot, we'll say 800,000 of that is dedicated to businesses, 200,000 is dedicated to nonprofits. Okay. And again, if we put that cap of say $25,000, $50,000 on the nonprofits, as we did with the businesses, I think that might be a little bit more of a fair ask.
I could live with that too. So, okay.
Yeah, I would agree that if that is the division, if we have in mind that we prefer to put most of the resources toward businesses in Williamsport, then I think we should definitely clarify that. Because otherwise it's unfair to the nonprofits that might rush to fill out applications for what really is a relatively limited pool of funding.
Yeah.
And then certainly we would want to insert a cap on the amount of money that an individual nonprofit could request. I would still suggest that we should, as we look at monies yet to expend in our ARPA funding, depending on maybe the initial, we should look to see if we can find more funding for this program. But even that said, yes, my hope would be that it will be appealing enough to businesses in the area that we would see a lot of interest there.
We have somebody here tonight that's interested.
Okay.
So,
well, that's good.
yeah, I think we're
My
gonna
fear
get
is
good
that
interest.
my fear is that if there are certain restrictions like, lowest bidder provisions and things like that, that may lower some of the interest. But that said, I think we could certainly, if we didn't get the level of interest that we expected, shift more funding into the nonprofit arena or something like that. I think there would easily be justification for that if we simply didn't have a number of good applications, that merited award. Right. So anyway, I guess we should ask Mr. Regan how we go about that. But if we can set a general, if we're saying 800,000, 200,000, great. If we can modify that, if that really is, if we don't have a lot of good applications in the business realm and we have several, or if we have to abide by that once it's set.
Adam, this is Bonnie.
Yep.
I agree with what Eric said, that we can't ignore our nonprofits because they do bring a lot to our city. But our business community has been hurting since COVID, as we well know, and a lot of businesses are still not able to get back on their feet, as we all know. And to me, it'll be vitally important to make sure this information does get out to the businesses, that the information that they can swallow and start to digest, and maybe can apply for the grants. Let's face it, the businesses are going to bring the tax revenue into our city, which we're looking for. And that's to me is vitally important, especially when we're looking down the road in 2 years of where we're going to be. So to me, I think we've got to really make this more available to the business community than the nonprofits. Not to say that we're going to slight them, but I think because of the justification of what we need to come up in the near future.
Thank you, Mrs. Katz. Jack, do you need us to formally just change anything based on this discussion as well? Or is this discussion guidance enough for you to move forward as far as those caps, that kind of stuff?
I think it's fine. Was there a cap for the nonprofits or not?
So I think if I was understanding it right, I think we were talking about from just an allocation perspective, about 80% of the $1 million for business, 20% for nonprofits initially.
Right.
And I think for a cap on the nonprofit specifically, I think we were talking what, like maybe 25 or $30,000.
I don't think it needs to be divisible.
Well, yeah, but I mean, anybody have any other comments on either of those?
And again, to Liz's point, I just want to make sure that this is, can Jack confirm this is something that we can alter again if we get a crush of nonprofit requests and very little business requests? This is something that we're.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
that's not a problem at all. And actually, many of the communities have, like done what you're doing, which is just saying, here's nonprofit, here's business applications, let's see what we get. And you sort of work the levers, based on what comes in. You kind of had a informal goal, like you said here, of 80-20 going into it. It may end up being 50-50 or whatever, it ends up. I like the thought of sort of seeing what the applications do when they come in. I will tell you that, I know the comment was made earlier, about people sort of self-selecting whether or not they want to participate in the program based on whether or not they've got to have the flexibility to be able to select their own vendors, or if they've got to go to somebody, get more information, get multiple bidders. That is certainly something I've seen in other communities where people have selected out if they can't use someone very, very specific. The bigger limitation is coming up with the matching dollars. What I've seen in other communities is the dollar for dollar match or something like that tends to limit some businesses from applying. But I think it's a very good practice to help subsidize. The business gets a little bit of an investment in, and then it's matched by the city's ARPA. That is very common structure across these programs.
Thanks, Jack. Okay. Any other comments, questions to add to the discussion? Anybody? Good discussion on this. I'm glad to see this. Regardless, this is good stuff.
Yeah.
Very good stuff. Okay. Mrs. Frank, on the motion then, please, for item 7.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes.
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. Jack, thank you for your work on this in collaboration with the administration. And you and I have had a couple phone calls about this and a number of stuff. Thankful for it. And we're glad we're working with you and have you on board here.
Appreciate the opportunity to serve the council and the citizens of the city. Appreciate your time.
Vice versa.
Bye now.
Take
Bye.
it easy. Is there anybody else online? I don't think there is, aside from Mrs. Katz. Okay. We'll go back in order here. So item number 5, Mrs. Frank.
An ordinance transfer number 2 in final reading.
Is there a motion and a second?
So moved. Second.
Motion and a second. The mayor's not here. I'll cover for him here. So this is the second reading of the transfer ordinance. This is in relation to the settlement that was approved a couple of weeks ago. This is a lump sum payment coming out of the general fund. I think we're all pretty aware of what it is, et cetera. Any questions or comments? Okay. Mrs. Frank on the motion then, please.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
No.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes,
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, motion passes 6-1. Item 6, Mrs. Frank.
An ordinance ARPA transfer number 6 in first reading.
Is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. So this was reviewed in Public Works. This is a transfer ordinance to put money into, I think 170,000 specifically to 175. To accommodate some needs at Ways Garden. So this is coming out of Recreation Future Project Reserve going into a new line item. I'll turn this over to Mrs. Katz. This was reviewed in Public Works. The Ways Garden Commission has presented previously to Public Works, so she's pretty up to snuff on the background here. Mrs. Katz.
yes. Mr. Nyman was there present at our meeting to discuss, Waste Gardens. As we all know, this is one of the jewels of our city. And what this money is going for is the fence that's, first of all, the fence that's going around Waste Gardens has been up for decades. It's now starting to really disintegrate in certain areas. And we do want to keep the gardens up and looking as pristine as possible. The other projects that are still going on in Waste Gardens is the cement for paving and around the water fountain. And hopefully, as Mr. Nyman said, they are working on getting that up and running, the water fountain, as soon as possible. The Ways Gardens Committee has also gotten a $25,000 not grant, but funding from the county. And this money would really bring the garden up to where it should be. And the rest of anything that is done, they do their own fundraising. This is really one of the few times that they do come to us. They've come to us for money. And I think since we're doing so many of our parks, that this is vitally important. The other part of the transfer is for Lowe's Park for the community garden. The community garden was in process several years ago. I know Ms. Mealy was working with the community garden, and it was just it was wonderful for the community there. So we're all happy that that's going to be up and running again. Other than that, we're waiting for, there's 2 bids. Let's go back to Waste Gardens. I'm sorry, I forgot about this. There are 2 bids in for the fencing. We need 1 more bid. We need 3 bids. And Scott Livermore from Streets and Parks is working on this with Mr. Nyman to see where we go with this. And hopefully this will, within a month or 2, this will be, up and running. Other than that, I have nothing more to add to this.
Thank you, Mrs. Katz. Any additional comments from other members of council? Ms. Mealy. Oh,
No,
sorry.
Randy, go
Randy,
first.
yeah, please.
We
looked
talked
through
about, well, this will bring the Ways Garden project up to, I think Paul said around 98% done with what everything was planned to do with Ways Garden. So that should last us a while. And part of the concrete is an ADA required path from to the parking lot that McCormick has now. So those are the only other 2 things. The fence is the big cost in this.
Ms. Mealy.
Fences are fantastically expensive. Bonnie, I apologize. What did you say we were doing at Lowe's with that $2,500?
The community garden.
What specifically is it going into? Do you know?
This is what the mayor said. He said they were bringing back a community garden. And I'm assuming it was what it was like before. No other information was given to us.
Okay.
We have a second reading.
I assumed he talked to you about this.
Well-
No, I don't think we've discussed it. But yeah, we can cover that in second reading when the
Yeah.
mayor's here. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks.
the implication was that it had fallen down a little bit.
Yeah,
Quite a bit.
if I recall from all, I believe it's for a few like tools and just some like basic equipment to get it back up and running to where it needs to be. That's all that I know though as well. So.
Got it.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I just we just
can-
haven't discussed it. It's
Yeah.
okay. I can ask Derek about it later. I was just,
Yeah, we can get that in second reading.
didn't know if we had clarity on it. So thanks.
Yep.
That was all.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, hearing seen none, Mrs. Frank on the motion in first reading.
Mr. Allison.
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes,
Mrs. Katz,
Yes,
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. We will jump down to item 8, Mrs. Frank. And this is removing it from the table.
I take the vote.
Well, yeah,
Yeah, we have to take the vote first.
so item 8, the MOA for the additional health item for the firefighters, it's on the table. Is there a motion and a second to remove it from the table?
So move. Second.
Motion and a second to remove from the table. Mrs. Frank on the vote to remove from the table, please.
Mr. Allison.
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
yes,
Mrs. Katz,
yes,
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, it is removed from the table. Chief Ungst,
Good evening. sir.
you're back.
So what you have, I think you have in front of you is an amendment to the resolution as well as the MOA. With the resolution, we added the paragraph that says, now be it resolved that the MOA shall not be considered an amendment to the CBA. As well as in the third paragraph, we included not to exceed $11,700 total. In the MOA itself, we added the verbiage with the help of Norm Lubin and Austin White. Provided, however, that nothing in this MOA shall prejudice or affect the rights of any party to use, discover, obtain, or otherwise access medical information possessed by the UDS or the employee in terms of any future legal proceedings.
Where is that?
That's on the memorandum of agreement.
Yeah, like where in the document? Item 4.
So that's on the updated one.
Okay,
The
that's
updated-
you added that last sentence on item 4.
Correct.
Okay.
Sorry.
No worries. I was skimming it as you were saying, and I'm missing words, and I'm just like, I couldn't find it, so I just asked. So thank you for that. Okay. I missed the whole discussion last week, so I mean, I'll rely on you guys here, but I guess any comments, questions on, so first off, we have to formally amend the resolution to incorporate this stuff since it's already on the agenda on the table. So we'll have to go through that process at some point. But I guess, are there any questions, comments, about the changes, anything from last week that anybody has?
No.
Ms. Mealy?
well, I actually also missed the discussion 2 weeks ago. I was 25 minutes late and I passed Eric a note and said, what were you guys talking about? Well, I wasn't here because nothing, they hadn't covered much on the agenda. But the only question I would have was, I think that the concern was that we didn't want to effectively be incorporating this into the union contract, absent opening up the contract entirely. So the one question I would have is, should we incorporate into the memorandum of agreement a sunset on this health screenings concept that coincides with when we will be renegotiating the union contract?
I guess so. Norm, any legal feedback on that?
Since it's not part of the union contract. If they want to incorporate it in the next contract, they'd have to have specific language in the contract itself.
I guess what I'm saying is if there is no sunset on this provision,
Well-
we can theoretically discontinue it at any time, I suppose. But,
Well, the natural sunset would be the funding issue. If the money runs out, without council reappropriating more money.
is there money appropriated currently?
Yes.
Okay,
Where?
how much and where?
You're gonna ask
It's
that
in,
next.
I believe, 3 different sources.
Well, I mean, I see that only a third of it's coming from the city of Williamsport, but
Yeah.
where is it allocated in the city?
Contract services,
Pardon me?
contract services.
It's in the
Contract
fire,
services
it's in the fire
department.
budget. It's
Got
in
it.
the fire budget.
So basically, we would cut the contract services budget and that would effectively terminate the contract
Yes.
is the idea. Okay.
If we want to sunset this for whatever reason, I don't think it's a bad idea. I would support that, but
Yeah.
but I also don't know if, I mean, clearly this went back to the union and stuff, and I don't know if that would trigger that happening again as well. I don't think so, but
Right. I don't know. I guess I'm just asking. I mean, it seems to me like what we are like my impression of the discussion that I missed 2 weeks ago was that the concern was that this was effectively adding something into the contract without opening up the contract. And so to make sure that we aren't doing that, the best mechanism to me would be to say, okay, so these health screenings are, will be funded under contract services until, X date when the contract renegotiation happens. But I'm not sure. You guys who were here and were concerned about it might be better off to tell me whether or not that would be required to meet your concerns or not.
I'm okay with that
Okay,
personally, but I wasn't here also, so
okay.
see Eric nodding your head. I don't
Yeah,
want to put you on
I'm
the
good with
spot,
I had no concerns, so.
Okay.
but yeah, I mean, so we can add that language in there.
Well,
If I may.
it wouldn't matter because the funding itself from the city would end December 31st unless you put it into next year's budget. So there's natural sunset provision in and of itself.
I mean, in any.
Which would
year,
be our budget.
basically.
Well, but I mean, here's the kicker. I mean, worst case, it's a little bit of a trigger that just, I think, makes us revisit this if we need to revisit it once it sunsets,
Mhm.
right? And I don't, odds are I'm going to forget about this by the end of the year, beginning of next year. And that's not any disrespect to the fire department. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that comes in front of us. Honestly, half the time I can't remember what I did last week.
Yeah.
So and that's just life. And so
What about yesterday?
yeah, and so that might be helpful from that perspective also.
So if I may add, the primary objective of this is to get a baseline. As I explained 2 weeks ago, it's a baseline so that we can explain, that if, God forbid, in the future, somebody does come down with a cancer or, some sort of malady, there's a baseline that's already established. So we would not be coming back asking for this. However, currently with our, as we hire firefighters, we are getting them a somewhat similar testing,
Mhm.
not to this degree though, currently. But we would like to, as we hire in the future, we would like to make this part of that hiring process. So we would budget accordingly.
Got it. So I guess if we're looking for that as what I'm hearing is perhaps kind of a defense for the city in the event that someone were to have a physical ailment like this, is that kind of what you're saying? That if we're doing kind of a baseline screening upon hiring, part of the idea there is to establish whether the physical ailment was possibly already in the works before the hire point?
Correct.
Okay. If we're not privy to any of the resulting medical information,
How do
how does that accomplish that end goal?
So, well, that would come out in the, if in the future somebody develops cancer, this would come out. This would be part of the,
So we would have, so the information would be had on file, but it would not be used unless something happened down the
Correct.
road to validate that. That doesn't,
Molly, can I is that a legit,
yeah.
from an HR perspective, can we approve something which says explicitly that we don't have access to the information, but in a court case we would?
Yeah, it's a little.
It's hip hop.
Okay.
That's the.
Well, I mean, and I understand that. I'm not asking for access to anybody's personal health information, but I guess what I'm saying is if we're agreeing that we don't have access to it, then why do we get access to it in future?
That was Norm's point the other week, I believe. Why would we not have access to this information? And when he raised that concern, we ran it by Austin, and Austin added that second paragraph in number 4, where if a legal proceeding does arise,
Okay.
then the city would have access to it, and then we could access those records to make sure that the city was.
So that opens it up
Mhm.
for us. Okay,
Yeah.
got it. All right. Okay, so this is, and I'm really sorry that I missed all the discussion, so I'm making you rehash everything, Chief. So this is effectively somewhat of a protection for the city. We are eventually hoping to incorporate the screening concept for all new hires, at which point we will no longer need this contract at all, because we will have screened everyone at the outset of their employment. Okay, so this is not something that we're doing on an annual basis or something like that for all of our, okay.
Can I step in
Well, now
here?
that I understand things, then yeah, all right.
So a couple of the.
Adam, I have a question.
So do I,
Chief-
hang on.
Chief, did you not say this is a 3-year contract?
No,
No, it's not a 3-year contract?
no.
No, that's just what we were talking about, Bonnie. There is no end date on this.
It's a once and done thing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. For some reason, I had that in my mind. Maybe it was because of the 3 different entities that were involved in this in my mind. Because there was a huge discussion with this. I do have concerns with where you're going to do the procedures, which is in Reichert. And that is on Reichert Avenue, and that's a condemned building. Why would
That's not that building?
from what I understood, it was.
No,
No?
it's just not occupied.
I know it's not occupied, but I didn't think it was a safe building to be in.
No,
Okay.
it's still occupiable if we were to choose to do so, but.
Okay,
How long
but it's
been
been
on?
closed. It's been closed for how long, though? It's been closed for quite a while.
Well, we had the assistant chief and the fire inspector that were stationed out there. And then when the fire inspector got promoted to assistant chief, he went to Woodlake Cumming for another issue or another stance. And we never promoted another inspector after that. So that's when it closed. I think that was 2017-ish, 2016. But it's still occupied, it's still used as part of the Special Operations Center. That's what we call it, the SOC. Our Urban Search and Rescue, our task force truck is up there. Our reserve truck is up there. If we, God forbid, were to have a major storm of some type and we would need to expand our on-duty complement, we could send 2 guys up there to work out of that station.
See, I just thought it was for what you just stated with all the equipment for search and rescue, the boats and everything else that are in there. I didn't realize there were people in there because of the way it was explained before.
Right. There's not people stationed in there. It's very similar. Well, I don't want to say it's similar to Company 4, but it's a station that we use, but we don't man.
Okay. And the other question that I don't think we touched this the last 2 weeks ago was, why isn't this covered by our city insurance, medical insurance? And why isn't this done with other people, other employees of the city?
The firefighters are subjected to carcinogens, other hazards that the normal employee is not subjected to. So in your usual schedule of preventive screenings, these are over and above what the normal person receives, and is warranted to ensure that the firefighters, aren't developing issues along those lines.
That we can see when they go into the buildings that they do go into. You never know what you're going to encounter, but our insurance would not cover this then.
Right, it's not a normal thing that insurance would cover for anybody. It's not just our plan. Just any employer's plan would not normally cover these additional tests.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Wouldn't our firefighters have a little bit different unique insurance? I mean, through their union contract already? I mean, like it's a known hazard they're going into. I would think that. I mean, I could be wrong, but I would think that they would be insured or have health insurance that reflects that.
Yeah, that hasn't been a thing. I mean, that's a good point that their coverage should reflect that. That just hasn't been the how it's been set up. They have the same preventive screenings that everybody else has, but that's a good point. Maybe we can address that in the next round of contracts for the health insurance.
Which are coming up this year, right?
Mhm.
Next year.
Wow.
It's every year.
No,
We were-
the next
we were-
contract negotiation. Sorry.
We
We're
were-
talking about
we
two
were-
different things.
Oh, no, sorry, I meant.
Yeah.
But, right, yeah, healthcare, yeah, we were looking at RFPing healthcare this year anyway, so.
Yeah.
I think that would be an excellent idea, Molly, because as the chief just stated, I mean, the reason behind this whole action, and that wasn't discussed before. And, so bad on us not even realizing that, knowing what these men walk into and what men and women walk into, it can be detriment to their health. So I can understand that, but let's see what we can do insurance wise. Okay. And the cost per person of this is $325 per person, which is not a huge amount of money. It really isn't. I mean, you can't even walk into a doctor's office for that kind of money anymore. So, it's, I think it's a good thing for the men in our department, in that department.
Norm, can I revisit this language that was added, that was looked at by Austin? Does that satisfy? I believe you had a question on that last week or 2 weeks ago. Does that satisfy the question you were asking?
The question I was asking, if the city's paying for a test, why isn't the city receiving a copy up front? But
You're saying HIPAA.
I wasn't involved in the original negotiation on it. So I sort of backed off since Austin was involved in the beginning. But that was just a personal feeling, that's all. It wasn't a legal issue, it was more just looking at it from a perspective of, the HR department, I assume gets, medical information on all our employees and it's kept separate from their personnel file.
I don't get all of the employees, health screenings, things like that. So I hesitate to have access to the information because I wouldn't want anybody to ever think that we made an employment decision based on that information. So I don't feel that we should have that information. I liked that Austin added that section though, in case there were to be litigation to protect the city. But personally, I feel like it gives us more of a standing of we're not, again, making those employment decisions based on that information. That's private information. I don't know if somebody, has a regular screening, what those results are, and I shouldn't have those results. And the city shouldn't have those results. Genetic information, the city should not be privy to, that sort of thing.
I mean, so I got Norm, in your mind, what would be the benefit of us having it?
Of what?
Of having the information on file rather than not having it?
The only benefit would be is if the screening comes back and it raises a serious question, and whoever reviews it on behalf of HR, that Molly can go to the chief and say, hey, wait a minute, we got a problem with this person.
And it's not illegal, right?
It's not a legal issue, it's more of administrative. And with, I understand with firefighters, they're exposed to a lot of carcinogens, and the workers' comp laws, take that into consideration for firemen. They have specific revisions to protect the firemen, and it should. The only thing we would never know is, did the person have it before they became a fireman. We would never know that.
Right, and if we wouldn't have it, if we wouldn't have these tests, we'd never know.
Yeah.
You know, either.
And we could be, by doing these tests, we could be preventing future more serious illnesses that could arise down the road. So, it's more preventive. We learn of, potential issues now that could be treated earlier on than rather than waiting 10 years down the road when it's more progressed and could be more costly to the city at that point and to the firefighter at that point.
Ms. Mealy.
I guess as part of this arrangement for the testing, does the employee in question receive counseling of sorts? Because I guess one of the things I'm saying is if new hires are receiving this full screening and they can look at the screening and say to themselves, I've got a predilection in my family for cancer of these types, and that is likely to be an issue within, do you know what I'm saying? I mean, to me, if I were looking at going into a line of work and it turned out that I was likely to wind up with a cancer as part of entering that line of work, I would reconsider. Right. And so I guess, to Norm's point, might be helpful to the city to have that information because of course we could try to wash candidates who were likely to wind up in a bad health situation, but it would also, of course, be helpful to the individual to have that information or to have that discussion with the provider. I don't, that. If that information is available to us, right? If we are learning that we are, more prone to these cancers than the average member of the population, then we should put that information to use as part of it, in some way as part of the hiring process, whether it's counseling for the individual or an adjudication by the administration. I don't know. Right.
Okay.
But anyway.
Mr. Allison.
Chief, since this is a voluntary program,
Right.
Is it your sense that the rank and file is on board with this? Or have you had meetings and have they had input into the?
Yes, the vast majority of members are in favor of it. To my knowledge, there are 2 individuals who don't want to take it.
Mhm. Understandable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Yeah, I do lean, I do think we should. Ms. Mealy brought up a really, really good point of the benefit of having this information rather than waiting until they get something, some kind of a disease or get sick. We tabled this 2 weeks ago to visit the language. Should we do that again? We could amend it again, but at the same token, that would just trigger it going back to, so.
It goes back to obviously the union to.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
So are you saying retain this information in direct conflict with what Molly just said? Is that what we're talking about here? Molly just clearly said, our HR person clearly just said we should not have this information on file. And I don't claim to be an HR expert, and I think all of you are very smart people, but none of you are HR. She just said we shouldn't have this on file. So I'm not even sure why we're talking about this. This is what we pay Molly to do, right? To give us this type of advice. All due respect to Norm, to Liz, to you, President Yoder, but our HR person just told us we should not have this information on file. So I'm not sure why we're having this conversation. That's just my opinion. I'm going to lean towards what Molly tells us. That's my opinion.
I get you, John, but again, Liz brought up a really good point. I don't think we're really talking about using this to.
I think actually my point was that we should in some way or another be counseling the employees, whether that happens through the city or whether that happens through the healthcare provider. But we should be helping people to interpret the results so that they understand what their risks
because
are.
of this occupation. Are you sure you want to do this?
I would agree. If Molly thinks we shouldn't have this on file and that could get compromised, I think that is absolutely the case and that is fine. But I do think that that it's only so much use to do these kind of investigations if you aren't then counseling people about the, proposed, about how to interpret those results. I'm assuming that's part of the screening, right?
Yes.
Okay, all
That's my
right. Sorry, okay, okay.
Right, we can counsel people and not have this information on file. We're having two separate discussions.
Right,
here,
right.
Right.
Yeah, no, yeah,
Right.
right.
As long as we're not talking about putting in some sort of language now that contradicts what Molly just told us not to do 10 minutes ago, then yeah, I'm okay with that, but does that, yeah, I mean, that's what I'm trying to say.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Any other comments or questions? Okay. Here you see none, Mrs. Frank on the motion, please.
Mr. Allison.
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes,
Mrs. Katz,
Yes,
Mr. Yoder.
No. Motion passes 6-1. Item 9, Mrs. Frank. Thank you, Chief.
Resolution authorizing purchase of a server refresh from Global Data Consultants.
Is there a motion and a second?
So moved. Second.
Motion and a second. Mr. Black, welcome.
Hi,
Hi.
both of these resolutions are kind of tied together. They're basically the same project. The difference being is the funding for one portion as opposed to the other. This is to update and renew our current server farm. The current farm was put in roughly the 2016 timeframe from what I can find. They're out of warranty. They are old, they've been used well, and it's time for new. The first part of it is going to be for the police department, and that comes to a total of $67,027.36, and that will be funded out of the PCCD grant that they got. They had written this into it. We got authorization for this last Thursday from the grant. And the other portion is for $27,580.86, and that will be coming out of my capital budget. Both of these are coming from a company called Global Data Consultants. They are out of Chambersburg, and they are on a CoStarz contract.
Thank you, Mr. Black. This was reviewed in Public Works. Bonnie?
yes, it was. It was reviewed on Public Works. And I think the only thing I can say to this is the servers are old and they're not dying, but they're not working up to snuff. And this is the reason for it. Chris is looking to use them in other areas. Chris, I can't remember what you said the areas were for at this point. I didn't write it down, but
I'll
they're
be
not
working to set up a disaster recovery center for them,
right. Thank
an
you.
offsite.
So, but this is much needed. It's like so many other things that are in the tech business, is that things get outdated. And these servers are how old, Chris? These are really quite dated.
6 to 7 years currently.
Mhm. And that's old when it comes to something like that. So, so other than that, that's a discussion that we had.
Any comments or questions? Remind me, these are physical servers, right?
Correct.
Have we
And we
looked at-
run a virtual environment
So
on.
we are
Yeah,
gonna run on a
we're
virtual
buying a
environment?
total of 4 boxes
Okay.
that'll house about 25 servers virtually.
Okay. That was, yeah, perfect. We kind of talked about this last week, so good. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Hearing seen none, Mrs. Frank on the motion, please.
Mr. Allison.
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes,
Ms. Mealy,
yes,
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. Item 10.
Thank you.
Resolution authorizing purchase of a server refresh from Global Data Consultants.
Hey, Chris,
Chris.
you're up
Oh,
again.
sweet.
Chris, you're still up, man.
Yeah.
You're up
Yeah,
again.
number
You got
2.
2 of these.
Well, they were tied together.
Yeah, they're separate items. We got to vote on them separately. Sorry. Yeah, I didn't catch that until afterwards. Otherwise, we could have.
My apologies.
No worries. Nah, vice versa. Motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Mr. Black, anything to add from the previous?
No,
This was a reading in Public Works. Bonnie, anything to add from the discussion in Public Works?
no,
Any
no, I
comments?
think Chris got
How old are the servers, Chris? I'm just kidding.
These ones are brand spanking new.
Just kidding.
Mrs. Frankel on the vote, please.
Mr. Allison.
Yes.
Mr. Mackey.
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes.
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, motion passes 7-0.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Chris. Janice, by my notes, we're at 14. Everything else is taken care of.
Yep.
Perfect. Item 14, except for filing, we have the Finance Committee meeting minutes from January 31st and February 14th, 2023, and Economic Revitalization on February 18th, 2023. Is there a motion and a second?
So move.
Second. Motion and a second. Any comments or questions from members of council? Hearing seen none, Mrs. Frankel on the motion.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes.
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. Item 15. Announcements. Next meeting for city council will be on Thursday, May 11th, 2023, right here, 7 p.m. Upcoming meetings, Monday, May 1st, 12 p.m. is our planning commission, 4:30 p.m. Veterans Memorial Park Commission. Tuesday, May 9th, 11:30 a.m. Public Safety, 1 p.m. Finance, 2:30 p.m. Public Works. Wednesday, May 10th, 9 a.m. is our ERC committee, and Thursday, May 11th at 7 p.m. is our city council meeting. Are there any comments from members of council? Mr. Mackey?
I mean, the mayor's not here tonight, obviously, but, and Scott, maybe just something for you to keep your eye on, but there are still people putting a decent amount of debris out on the streets. And I don't know that as far as I can tell, that shouldn't be happening anymore, right?
It
That
should not be.
right.
Mr. Livermore, would you mind just rehashing the timelines for the street cleanup or the brush pickup? I know it's happening on my street.
I see it all over.
Yep.
Yeah, my neighborhood. People are putting stuff out right and left still. And
Thought we picked up for like a month.
Well, there was a window as far as when you should be setting it out.
Yeah.
We're beyond that. So I think it's a good, if you don't mind, Scott,
Yeah,
thank you.
No, brush cleanup is still ongoing. The final day usually for that is going to be May 5th.
May 5th.
May 5th.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you still got some time. Usually we
Okay.
already went through the city at least once.
Okay.
If
And
we
I think
haven't,
you started early too.
yeah, we even tried to get out a little earlier.
Okay.
So,
I apologize. I thought we had
Yeah,
hit
so
that
did I.
threshold, but of putting stuff out, but
Yeah, I thought there was like a week or two window where people were supposed to put stuff out.
you can't, so if I remember right, April 17th, week before April 17th, you could have started putting out and we kind of took advantage of that. No, didn't tell anybody, but we went out and got some stuff.
Yeah.
But officially started April 17th to May 5th.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Thank you for the clarification. And I was thinking the same thing, Jim, so. Any other comments from members of council? I'm gonna embarrass John Mackey and just say an early congratulations on your capstone project. So we're gonna learn about it here a little bit later this year. But I know you've done a lot of hard work on it and
not just me,
yeah.
the whole planning team, yes, but we hope to have at least the base emergency operations plan officially ready to present to council here in hopefully the next month and a half. So,
well, he's presenting it for his graduation requirements tomorrow. So good luck and I'm proud of you. Thank you. Any comments from the administration? Any comments from the public? And any comments from the news media? Nobody's here. All right, motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you all. Meetings.